Okay, hi. I must be in holiday mode or something because this is take four. So we'll try to get through this now. It is President's Day. I wanted to do a quick video to cover week five and to introduce week six. There were four things I wanted to kind of cover. One is to make sure that you guys are clear on the relationship between project management and grant management. We talked about this a little bit in one of the discussion forums this week, so I wanted to just make sure that it's really clear in your head that having a good understanding of the project that you're going to manage in terms of scope, time, and money gives you a really good, clear understanding of what it's going to take to do the project that you have in mind. And this clarity of understanding then allows you to write a very accurate proposal in terms of what you want to do, the time it's going to take you to do it, and the cost, right? So that your proposal is accurate and it's also convincing in its detail. The more you can show your grant or prospective grantor, funder, that you know what you're talking about and that you really thought this through, the more convincing your credentials or ability to actually carry out the project will come across in your grant. And clearly that's a critical element because the grantor doesn't want to give money to someone who they don't think is going to be able to do what's promised. Okay? So that's the second connection between the project management and grant management. And the last thing is that having a good project management then gives you a great management tool for managing the grant that you get and the expenditure of money and completion of the project that you promised your funder in your grant proposal. Okay, it also gives you something concrete to work with when you go back to the funder if you have to adjust your project or some element of the grant that you got from the funder, right? Again, the more specificity, the more convincing your competences as reflected in the detail of your grant proposal, the easier it'll be for you to go back to the funder and say, listen, this is what happened. Remember I said I'd do this, but this came up, so we're going to try to do this. Is that okay? And you have that negotiation and you figure out the best plan B. Okay? All right, the second thing I really wanted to touch on were just the discussion forums from last week. The first one had to do with your understanding of what was the most important element of the project, the scope, the time, or money. And we had a good discussion. A lot of people focused on the scope. I would dare say in reflection that you can maybe think about this question in terms of what's the least important. And maybe that what is least important is what you have the most of. In other words, if you have an overabundance of money, if you have a little cash or cost overrun, well, that doesn't really matter because you're flush, so you can throw some extra money at the project, get it completed. Likewise, if the timeline of the project isn't critical, if you don't have a hard deadline, well, then maybe time's not the most important factor, etc. I don't know, I was just thinking about that. The second discussion forum question we talked about was the level of detail of your project planning. And I think the most important thing here is this notion that form should follow function. Your project plan is essentially, or what's the big word we use? The MBJ? All right, I'm going to show my ignorance there, but you remember the plan that you plan out of when and where you're going to do different stuff. It's a tool to help you reach your end, which is to bring your project in on time, on scope, and on budget. And so details aren't an end to them in themselves, but a means to that end. And so you plan to a level of detail that will help you reach that goal. And if you plan beyond that level of detail, well, then maybe you're doing extra work that will actually help you reach your goal. Okay? Okay, so the third thing then I wanted to talk about was just this week's assignment, where you have to have a statement of need and also a beginning schedule of work. And so remember that we talked about this statement of need in one of the earlier lessons, and it is covered in this book in chapter 5. In the beginning it talks a little bit about what the grantor is looking for. Essentially, why should I get involved? Why is this an important issue? What are you going to do to actually solve the issue, etc. And then in detail on page 168 in here, right, it goes into your need statement. So refer back to that when you are trying to do this week's assignment. But the basics here, and this is shown in the sample grant in this week's materials, is that in the need statement you need to clearly identify the need. What's the problem that needs solving? And you can use quantitative and qualitative measures to describe the problem, its magnitude, etc. And the second thing you want to do then is to think about the causal factors of that need. You know, why is this need arising? What is causing it? And then thirdly, okay, what's the solution? What can you do as an agency that's going to address those causal factors that in turn will address the problem that you've identified that needs addressing? Okay? Okay, so that's pretty much it there. Let's see. Okay, and okay, and then I guess just the fourth thing this week we're reading chapter 3 in this one, right? And it basically talks about how you get started doing a project and planning it, sort of the first steps that will get you off on the right foot, and then it also goes into risk management quite a bit. In other words, because we're planning, because we're doing projects that have not been routinized within your agency, typically there is not a history on which to try to make decisions. There's a certain amount of risk involved. And so how do you mitigate that risk? Well, they talk about some of the strategies for doing that within chapter 3. Okay? And we'll be discussing those issues in this week's discussion forums. Okay? All right, so if you have questions about this week, please call early and often. You know the number. What is it? It's, I don't have a piece of paper. Oh, God. It's 413-237-7475. And by now, you should be getting, or clearly understand, right, that your project that you're using for these assignments, the more it's real, the more you know the details, the more you can talk about it concretely, the better you're going to be able to do these assignments, and probably the better you'll learn from doing the assignments. And if grades are important, the better grades you'll be able to get, because you'll be able to talk more concretely about your assignment and apply the theory that you're learning in the books to the actual project that you are going to pretend you're going to write a grant for. Okay? All right. I guess lastly, no, that's it. All right? 10 minutes. Hope you're enjoying the day off if you get the day off, and we'll see you online. Okay, thanks.